Greetings, friends. Last night, Ukrainian drones once again for the umpteenth time attacked the so-called Russian Federation. There were strikes in the area of the Volgograd airfield.
Can anyone tell me what's burning over there? I just can't see. Please, there's so much smoke, it's really intense.
Information about the results of the attack still needs to be clarified. Meanwhile, the Russians have started to more actively shut down mobile internet in order to counter Ukrainian drones. Russian officials assure that the situation is completely under control. There's no need to panic, everything will be fine.
Starting today, a temporary restriction on the use of mobile internet is being introduced within a 5-kilometer radius of Bratsk Airport, JSC. I understand that this causes certain inconveniences, but I ask everyone to remain calm.
And of course, we could laugh at the Russians, but it should be noted that our adversary is making very active efforts to counter Ukrainian drones, while we have many problems that need to be addressed. But do you know where else there are problems with the internet right now? In Iran. They did this to prevent uprisings and operations by the Israeli army. By the way, speaking of Israeli army operations, Kabeyeva doesn't even bother to remember who the chief of the general staff in Iran is anymore, because they all end up dead anyway.
The third chief of the general staff in a row. The previous two individuals were simply killed in the last 7 days, unfortunately.
And so that Russian occupiers keep dying, I urge you to go and urgently donate to the current rhetoric.
Let's donate to Mrs. Sternenko. We believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
All the payment details, as always, are in the description of this video. Donate and encourage your acquaintances, friends and neighbors to donate as well. And also subscribe to my channel if for some unknown reason you still haven't. This morning, just like yesterday, Iran launched ballistic missile strikes against Israel. One of the strikes hit a military hospital. In turn, Israeli aviation dominates the skies over Iran and continues to strike the capital, Tehran.
Middle East. Well, not this.
Where the Ayatollah has gone is still unclear, but yesterday Iran, probably out of desperation, decided to launch a medium-range ballistic missile at Israel. It's something like the Russian Oreshnik. It's called Sejil. However, the missile did not reach its target. It was shot down
While still approaching. According to the Israeli side, there were no casualties or destruction.
And what do you know? I'm coy, I'm Pyron.
You're probably wondering, what about the Russians? After all, Israel is attacking the so-called Russia's ally, Iran. The Russians are just twiddling their thumbs. One of Lavrov's deputies warned the United States against providing military aid to Israel, otherwise the so-called Russia will do absolutely nothing, and Zakharova is fretting about it.
This is a precisely targeted strike, specifically aimed at the nuclear facilities of peaceful civilian infrastructure.
And this was said by the scum who represents the so-called Russian Federation, the very same Russian Federation that seized the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and struck the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, right on the sarcophagus, by the way, with an Iranian-Russian drone. The propagandists are so pained by what is happening with Iran that they accidentally let something slip. They told the truth on their own television that the so-called Russia is helping Iran with its nuclear program.
Iran is losing what it has been building with our help since 1995. And in fact, the foundations go back to the time of the Shah.
But in this contest of misery, Vladimir Putin is definitely the winner, because look, Israel is attacking Iran. Iran is an ally of the so-called Russia. They even signed a piece of paper over there recently, and Vladimir Putin remains silent and doesn't comment. Only yesterday, when journalists finally asked him what he thinks about the possible elimination of the Ayatollah, he refused to comment.
I hope that this will be the most appropriate answer to your question. I don't even want to discuss such a possibility. I don't want to.
Well, they themselves are already openly discussing it at the same time, Mr. Trump, Mr. Netanyahu.
To hear all of this, but I don't even want to discuss it.
So that Russians wouldn't worry about Iran, just as Vladimir Putin doesn't worry, propagandists started saying that it's nothing serious, who cares what's going on with Iran.
Russia.
On a global scale, nothing threatens us. And honestly, we don't care at all. It really doesn't matter here. Yeah, we don't care.
But the American President Trump definitely does care. He has switched to very aggressive rhetoric. This hawk is demanding Iran's capitulation.
We are not seeking a ceasefire. We are seeking total, complete victory. Again, do you know what victory means? There are no nuclear weapons.
And against this backdrop, there was a real split within Trump's team. We won't even mention Elon Musk anymore. No one knows who he is or what connection he has to Trump. But I will remind you that Tucker Carlson criticized Trump.
I think we will witness the end of the American empire. Obviously, other nations would want this, and it's the perfect way to undermine America on the shores of Iran. But I also believe this will put an end to Trump's presidency, essentially finishing it.
Of course, Trump didn't like that. He called Tucker crazy and openly mocked him, saying, well, let him say whatever he wants on television, since Carlson was once kicked out of Fox News.
I don't know what Tucker Carlson is saying. Let him appear on television and say it so that people will listen. Thank you.
The war within Trump's team has also spilled over to the American equivalent of Healy Kivi. Marjorie Taylor Greene stood up for Tucker Carlson.
He wholeheartedly believes in the same thing I do, that if we don't fight for our country and our people, then our children and grandchildren simply won't have a country at all.
But that was only the very beginning of the internal civil war within the MAGA movement, because Laura Loomer, another prominent Trump propagandist, spoke out quite strongly against Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson.
He was fired from Fox News, and at that time he was in a panic, afraid that Trump would destroy his career when his messages, in which he wrote that he hated Trump, became public. Tucker's reputation has just been ruined because he decided to sell out to some shady Arabs.
Of course, all of this benefits us. The fewer pro-Russian degenerates there are around Trump, the better. The weaker Trump's position is within the United States, the more we can count on America's support. Well, Carlson in the end kind of apologized, but that's not certain.
Tucker's a nice guy. He called and apologized the other day because he thought he had said something a bit too harsh, and I appreciated that.
Let's get back to the question of Iran. Some time ago, Vladimir Putin offered Trump his mediation services, but the President of the United States rejected Putin's offer.
He actually offered to help as a mediator. I said, do me a favor, be a mediator in your own country. Let's deal with Russia first, okay? I said, Vladimir, let's deal with Russia first.
But as we know, Vladimir Putin has no intention of ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. On the contrary, the Russians are striking Ukrainian residential buildings more and more often. And after the attack on Kyiv, where the Russians killed more than 20 people at once, Vladimir Putin claimed that it was a military target. And the strike was not on residential neighborhoods, but on facilities of the defense industrial complex, on factories that produce military equipment. Vladimir Putin's lie is so blatant that even Chinese television doesn't buy it, where they directly stated that a Russian missile hit a residential building.
One missile hit directly on the roof of a 9-story residential building, piercing all the way down to the basement. The entire entrance of the building collapsed. More than 40 apartments were destroyed.
And I should remind you that the Russians themselves admitted that they struck the residential building, but apparently no one told Vladimir Putin about this. He has no idea.
Yes, sometimes everyone hits houses. Yes, it happens. Although we perfectly understand that, well, the Russian army doesn't aim deliberately. It's completely pointless. It's just absurd. Yes, but different situations do happen.
The deranged old degenerate Vladimir Putin keeps telling fairy tales that he doesn't plan to start any new wars, doesn't plan to attack Europe, and on that very same day his own propagandists say the opposite.
The legend that Russia is going to attack Europe, attack NATO countries, is that very same incredible lie. Well, we understand that this is nonsense.
And anyone in Europe who tries to go to war with us will be destroyed.
As for direct negotiations with Vladimir Putin, he continues to refuse them and tells us the same old story about illegitimacy.
That's not the issue. The question is who will sign the documents. But if the top official is illegitimate, the entire system of power becomes illegitimate. It's written there, just read it carefully.
By the way, Vladimir Putin himself is actually an illegitimate ruler of the so-called Russian Federation, because the so-called elections were held with significant violations, including in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And furthermore, the first time he became the head of the so-called Russia, it wasn't through elections, but because Yeltsin appointed him.
It's written there, read it carefully.
Nevertheless, for us there is nothing fundamentally new here. The so-called Russian Federation wants to continue waging war against Ukraine, which means we must only strengthen our support for our military. And thanks to you, our soldiers received another 355 new FPVs over the past day. Glory to the heroes, We are fighting against a strong enemy, but they greatly overestimate themselves in many ways. We need to deliver even more kamikaze drones to our warriors. We have an extremely large number of new requests. That is why I ask you to continue supporting the security and defense forces of Ukraine.